Hello everyone, I hope that you are doing fine. Today I'm here with another topic. I would like to talk a bit about a reaction, an annoying and frustrating one, which can happen following trauma experiences. So actually this is a trauma response. You might have heard about people who sometimes find it very difficult to find words or express themselves or to formulate, their thoughts and their reflections when they want to respond to a situation or answer a question, especially in those situations which demand, talking about emotions and demand emotional engagement, like situations which are about themselves, their internal world, their boundaries, their values, their past experiences, or literally, their personal truth. Of course, there are many people who are generally not very comfortable talking or dealing with emotions and have got a kind of rather logical approach towards self and relationships and life in general. So I'm talking about those who in particular struggle with explaining their inner experiences. Also, they might have a feeling that they know the quality of their unpleasant experiences, that for example it's not a good experience, it's just unpleasant. So we know that emotional numbing is trauma blocking reaction or coping mechanism which our brain selects to use at the time of occurrence of that experience, such as an overwhelming experience of not being loved or never being safe as a child, in order to protect the child from collapse or experiencing an exaggerated amount of pain all at once. It means that when fight or flight responses are not available, you might freeze. So there is actually, like other trauma responses, so-called, a wisdom into that reaction. So inarticulation, or a struggle to find words, inability to make our thoughts understood, can be a detachment or numbing trauma response. Okay, let me draw your attention to the fact that the developmental age in which the trauma occurs influence the form of our later responses. If traumatic experiences happen during very young ages, let's say before school start, the impact will be huge, because the child's nervous system and brain is still, developing and establishing neural pathways, and many abilities are still under process of development and shaping. So, such as language and linguistic skills. So the fact that many people struggle with inappropriate and reactive responses and behaviors is because that their bodies have probably experienced something very emotionally tough and overwhelming back in a time when they were only a little kid. So the response will manifest itself in a very concrete and explicit way, which entangles body, like the behaviors we see in reactive actions, like anger bursts and tantrum-like behaviors in adults. So I mean that behind that behavior, there might be a vulnerable kid who did experience, developmental trauma, and is just, using survival adaptations and reactions which need to be understood and acknowledged. That's very important. So during the first years of a child's life, the ability to express verbal language is not fully developed. There are several significant milestones for language development, but generally most of children will not be proficient in grammar and advanced language skills to understand abstract and complex concepts before around age of 6 or 7 years. And therefore, as an adult, you may not be able to explain and express your internal world's experiences and emotions and thoughts very well. I have heard many times in therapy room that from my clients who said that, I cannot talk about it, I don't know how to explain, I just cannot explain it, or something like that. Very general, very diffuse kind of explanations. It's not strange, because that trauma went directly through his body and his nervous system by the time of happening, and at that phase there was no or very little words or verbal constructions. to use, right? So as a matter of fact, children have only their bodies and nothing more reliable, and all of messages and words and energies go inside their bodies, regardless of being positive or love-based or negative and critical. So I always tend to believe my clients' meanings and experiences when they say that they cannot explain, because that is true. That's a real thing, real experience. As I mentioned before, children do not stop and think rationally why this happened to me, or that person or my parents who did it to me were themselves trauma survivors, or are suffering from this and that. They believe that it is their fault. That's it. Children are egocentric. It means that they believe that the world revolves around them, and this is the real authentic inner experiences of a child, that everything and everyone is out there in this world, out of her body or his body, because of him, because of his existence. This is a powerful and unique philosophy for little minds to start absorbing and processing all those overwhelming impressions and inputs coming from their surroundings toward them. So it is only their very experience which matters at some point. They believe it, internalize the harm. So the trauma get stuck in them, and especially when things like traumas with overwhelming emotional loads that happen and leave them with an experience that the situation is not controllable. This is actually a way of controlling the external world. Also, it is tough and painful by internalize the experience. I remember from therapy work with one of my clients, a young woman in her 20s, for a few years ago, this inarticulation, an inability to explain herself happened continuously under trauma processing work. I worked with prolonged exposure method and also psychoanalysis approach to help her processing and overwhelming trauma memory from her childhood. She lost her mother, unfortunately, in a very tragic accident when she was about 6 years old, and she was in a car when it happened and could remember her mother's last minutes. So they had a tiny conversation right before, and it was intense and powerful one, and they both knew that it's gonna happen soon. And she remembered that she was in total powerlessness and helplessness and a terrifying fear. And under processing of that huge overwhelming traumatic memory, she took plenty of pauses, I remember, while free associating with closed eyes. I observed her all the way, and I could see that she goes into a freeze, a total representation of powerlessness, exactly in the way she had in that original moment of loss. So her body was responding very well and according to the trauma footprints. And my biggest tool was then to help her to articulate the experience. I remember that in such heavy, powerful moments of rebirthing trauma, I tend relying on my gut feeling, and imagination power. I depicted a little helpless girl in my fantasy, and I really tried to see her and give her some words. I told her something like, okay, I see that you are feeling scared, you are confused, this is just too much, you cannot bear it alone, it's very difficult for you to handle this situation, you want to scream or shout for help perhaps. Just pay attention to your body now, in your chest, and so on, to help her to soothe herself, to see herself from inside. I became curious about my own experience as well, and saw that I was engaging with her emotional and psychological experience very much. My whole body was trying to, approach a little girl who was frightened, was shocked and stuck and witnessing death of her mom. And during process, she nodded and silently started weeping, and those words were working and reaching through her heart and her soul, as if they, those words were just falling into places in these trauma empty spaces like pieces. So her body came gradually out of freeze condition, and it was a gradual meltdown as she started saying more new words and using different formulations to address that subjective and physical experience. I felt that she's getting more and more engaged with her internal experience. That was a very good sign, and it was like she had finally found the power to push that stuck energy in her body forward and let her pain to mobilize itself to another level, right? So at the end of session, she told me that that was interesting because she felt that I said exactly the words that she wanted to hear, that I expressed her experience while she had it only stuck in her body and she didn't have the words for explaining that experience. And that was mind-blowing experience for her, and also, fascinating to witness for me, because it really proved again for me that the trauma-induced mutism is real and should be addressed with empathy and understanding. Of course, it was not only that experience and a specific therapy session which helped her, and the whole therapy journey became fortunately successful one, treatment for her. And this was just an illustrative example of how inarticulation due to trauma can manifest. So if you experience this often, especially in emotional loaded situations, when you really would like to or need to express yourself, please be kind with yourself. This might happen to you as an adaptive strategy driven by trauma. This understanding will help us to capture a more compassionate and understanding and kinding approach toward ourselves. If you have a gut feeling that this applies to you, please remember that this is a normal reaction, and it happens since your nervous system functioned very well and accurately at the time of trauma or interruption moments. Since it happens in body level, it is important to help body to understand that you are safe here and grounded and connected to yourself and to your surroundings and to the present moment, here and now. To do something simple like sitting down, touching something around, observing it, seeing the roof, the walls, your surroundings, make yourself fully aware that you are here and you are safe. Embrace your body with all emotions and experiences, and try to, stabilize the body by running a warm, reality-orienting dialogue with yourself or your inner child who is possibly feeling scared or unsafe. Remember, this is a trauma response and can be resolved and readjusted by therapy. I hope that these reflections have been interesting for you. Please share this video with others who might find it helpful. Thank you for tuning in and your support. Let's connect with another video in the near future. Thank you. Bye.